Do you want a VTuber model but don't have $1,000 to commission a rigger? Well, me too! In this video, I'm going to show you guys how I rigged my first model and explain the process to you as beginner friendly as possible. If I can do it, you can do it too. You can see how I separated my art in my last video, so I'm just going to focus on rigging. Rigging in Live2D is like attaching strings to a puppet. All this stuff might look intimidating right now, but it's actually easier than you think. It just takes a lot of time. A lot of time. To start, you just need to know about art mesh and parameters. Art mesh is like a polygon mesh in 3D. We put art mesh on our layers so we can change it. Place dots along any lines for a smooth deformation and try to make equilateral triangles whenever you can. Art mesh can be changed later, so don't worry about getting it right the first time. So now it moves. How does Live2D keep track of that movement? With parameters. For any art mesh, you can select a parameter and add keyforms. That keyform records the shape of the art mesh when the parameter is at that value. When the parameter's value changes from keyform to keyform, the art mesh will change from shape to shape. Live2D has a list of default parameters that represents basic motion like blinking, eye movement, head movement, etc. I've watched a lot of tutorials on YouTube, but no one seemed to mention how does these parameters actually get used in a tracking software like VTube Studio. That's what I was stuck on for the longest time. Basically, VTube Studio tracks your movement and translates that into parameter values. Like when my left eye closes, VTube Studio gives the IL open parameter a value of 0. So in Live2D, I add a keyform at 0 for all my eyeline art meshes to rig a closed shape when IL open is 0. So with a basic understanding of Live2D, I started with my left eye with the eye open parameter. Every rigger I watch start with eye movement and rig more general movements later, so that's what I'm doing as well. Select eyeline art mesh and click here to add two keyforms at 0 and 1. Eye open at 1 means open eyes, which I have already, so I just need to change the art mesh at eye open 0. This deform path tool is used to move any linear art mesh smoothly. I started off thinking I'm going to make the path perfectly match with the eyeline, so I put down a ton of dots. Yeah, that did not work out as I expected. Reducing the number of dots made the eyeline look way better. I ended up with 5 dots. I added the same keyforms on eye open parameter for the eyelash and just flipped the eyelash art mesh. I used the deform brush tool, it's like Liquify, to crumble up eye white and hide it under the eyeline. The iris is clipped to the eye white here, so I don't have to rig it for eye closed. At this point, I already learned the lazy way of making art mesh. Just use the stroke mesh tool to draw a bunch of dots at once. This is way faster than manually placing dots one by one. Okay, I just moved the lash shadow down a little and now we have a blinking eye. That was simple. Oh, and don't worry that I rigged it in the IR parameter instead of IL. I can change it later easily with the change option here. I then followed the same process to rig the eye smile parameter. 0 is normal and 1 is smile. Note that both eye open and eye smile affects my eyeline, so my eyeline art meshes now have 2 parameters activated for it. This means that all 4 of these combinations of eye open and eye smile needs to be rigged. That's 2 times 2 equals to 4 keyforms to rig just to add eye smile to the same art mesh as eye open. This is why you should only activate a maximum of 2 parameters per art mesh, unless the third one is just for an opacity change. With 3 parameters, you would have to rig 2 to the power of 3 keyforms, and it grows exponentially with the number of parameters. Okay, so I watched some Live2D showcases, and now I want to have my eyes open wider for when I'm surprised. So I added a keyform at 1.2 for my eye open parameter. For some reason, my eye disappears when I move to this new keyform. Why did that happen? Well, it turns out that the keyform is only added for the parameter. I need to add that keyform for the eyeline art meshes as well. Now it's showing. I proceed to rig keyform 1.2 as eyes wide open. I didn't rig eyes smile for eyes wide open because I'm lazy. Because looking in a mirror, smile doesn't affect my eye shape when they're wide open. Yeah, that's totally the reason, okay? Now that I have eye open and eye smile done, it's time for some organization. I used deformers to group my art meshes. The warp deformer is like a big square art mesh that can move multiple art meshes and deformers at once. In this case, I'm using it as a folder. First, Ctrl A to select everything and click on Create Warp Deformer to put everything in one deformer. This deformer will be used to move the entire body up and down later. I then grouped all the art meshes for head, eyes, hair, hair buns, nose, mouth, and earrings. I do suggest adding not used to these deformer names for now though. There might be unused deformers that you want to remove when you're done because too many layers of deformers will slow down your model. Time to rig eyeball X and eyeball Y. They both go from -1 to +1. X means left and right and Y means up and down. I created a deformer IR for everything in the left pupil. I'm not even going to explain why the left eye deformer is called IR. Just get all the way off my back about it, okay? Now that you're all the way off my back, let's activate the eyeball X parameter for this deformer. We want 3 keyforms this time. 1 for the default looking straight, and 2 for looking left and right. The past Sylvia didn't know that she can press and hold shift while dragging to move things perfectly horizontal and vertical, so we have to endure the deformer slowly moving from me pressing the arrow keys. Since the eye is a sphere, I do want to warp the iris a little when it moves. This is a good time to talk about conversion divisions and Bezier divisions in warp deformers. You can think of conversion divisions as an art mesh that is a grid. You can adjust how dense the grid is to make more detailed warps. Bezier division is the green grid. It provides a quick way to move many conversion divisions. Make sure these numbers are as low as possible because high numbers will affect your model's performance. Now that I have the division that I'm happy with, I started to warp this iris with the eyeball XY. And once I'm happy with eyeball X and eyeball Y, it's time to see how they look together. Select the IR deformer and select eyeball XY parameters. Then choose Synthesize Corners. This will automatically generate the 4 corner values here. It's generated poorly, but better than starting with a blank canvas. Once I fix these generated corners, I dip my toes into extended interpolation. Basically, when Live2D makes an art mesh or deformer move from keyform to keyform, it moves in a linear path by default. Well, this path could be set to a curve with extended interpolation. Anyway, that's the basic eye movement done. Time to test my work. I exported the model in Live2D and imported in VTube Studio. This is some uncanny valley stuff right here. But I'm so happy about it. It doesn't even track when I'm looking down, but I like what I'm seeing. Now let's make it bouncy. To do that, we need physics. I promise this is the last big thing to learn. Open the physics settings. It looks like a lot of stuff, but really there are only 3 things here. The input parameters affect the pendulums, which then affect the output parameters. Input parameters as angle will tilt the pendulum, causing it to shake and stay at a new position. Input parameters as position X will move the pendulums, causing it to shake a lot more, and it will return to its original position. The pendulums can be tweaked in the pendulum settings for your desired motion, and the motion created by the pendulum swing is then fed into the output parameters. All the output settings is basically just about how strong the pendulum affect the output parameters, except for reflect, which just reflects the motion. Now let's look at my eye jiggle physics with that info. Input is eye open, aka blinking. I have 1 pendulum assigned to each output parameter. The output parameter is eye jiggle A and eye jiggle B. Eye jiggle A stretch and compress the eye vertically, while eye jiggle B stretch and compress the eye horizontally. As I move my input, you can see how the pendulum affects the output. The 2 dots on my pendulum is moving in the exact same way as the 2 dots on my output parameters. If I change the input setting from position X to angle, you can see that there's a lot less jiggle in the pendulum, and the first pendulum doesn't go completely back to 0. So use position X when you want output to bounce and then go back to original position, and use angle when you want the output to bounce a little and move to a new position. So here's me actually setting this up. I created 2 deformers, one for iJiggle A and one for iJiggle B. I then stretched and compressed the deformers like I showed you. This is just for the iris. For the eyeline, I created another 2 deformers and did the same rig. The only difference is that iris should bounce a lot and eyelines should just do a little wiggle. This is just my personal preference. You can do whatever you want. I didn't even like the idea of eye jiggle in the beginning, but the more I look at them, the more those bouncy eyes draw me in. Now to the physics settings. Click add. You can ignore the preset options. It just auto add the input and pendulums. Click OK. Now we have a blank canvas. Add your input parameters, set to position X. Add 2 pendulums, go to the output, add your 2 jiggles. And is it working? Nope, of course not. My input effectiveness needs to be 100% effective. The pendulum was not showing up because I need to press the little all button down there for some reason. Now it bounces. If yours still don't bounce, make sure Apply Physics is checked and click on Increase Output in the output settings. I haven't really explained the pendulum settings yet, have I? Well, I read the official documentation and didn't understand anything. So I just took the F around and find out approach, tweak it until it works. Tweaking physics is fun anyways. I keep coming back to texture atlas in my screen recordings, so let's just get it over with. You can create it anytime you want. The texture atlas is just an image that stores your model image. If the scale is too small, your model will look blurry when exported and zoomed in. So make sure the scale of all head-related layers is at 100%. Body can be at a lower scale. I definitely won't zoom in on my model's body when I record, but I will definitely zoom in on my head. If you see one art mesh clipped into another joint rigging, check the texture atlas. If you can't see an art mesh, check the texture atlas and make sure it's in there. That's all for texture atlas. Like how it's going? Check out part 2 where I become Deadpool and then fall into a blender.